Welcome on inside the Business of Social podcast powered by STN Digital. As always, I'm your host, David Brickley. And every single show, we talk to the experts that keep you up to date, up to speed on the ever-changing digital social marketing landscape. And we actually, this next guest was a hookup from our boy TJ over at Twitter. TJ was episode 33, I believe. We are now on episode 35. Did you guys pull 35s for me? I got Kevin Durant off the top of the head. No more 35s? Frank Thomas. Okay, the big hurt. All right. Yeah, but I feel like we always go basketball. Ooh. What about Ricky Williams? Wasn't he 34? Oh, it is 35. I'm tripping. Okay, so let's make this the Hurt podcast. Mix it up a little. We're always going basketball, as I'm a basketball junkie. This is why this episode is interesting to me, because I am a basketball junkie. Our guest will be Danny Corrales. He is the producer of the Emmy-nominated studio show The Jump on ESPN, hosted by Rachel Nichols. Usually there's Paul Pierce on there. You got Scottie Pippen. You got who else am I missing? Tracy McGrady, T-Mac. So I want to talk to him about the show, because I think for years people have been going after Inside the NBA and trying to find out, how do we recreate this environment? You know, Chuck and Ernie and Kenny and of course Shaq have like kind of created this living room or this barbershop feel where you just tune in, and whether they're talking about basketball or not, you just enjoy it and you feel like they're in their living room with you. And I feel like ESPN's been trying to do that. Fox Sports has been trying to do that for quite some time, and I think they've honestly struck out quite a bit. But with The Jump, I think they finally got it right. I think there's personality there. I think Rachel Nichols kind of being the traffic cop, kind of the Ernie Johnson, the hot takes, the different personalities, the different arguments that happen back and forth in the debate. I really do. The reason why they are Emmy nominated, in my opinion, is because they've finally figured that part out, which is, again, it's a lot harder than it sounds. I think everybody wants to say, let's create a natural, organic environment where you feel like you're just hanging out with these players. And that's a very difficult thing to do. So to talk to the producer of The Jump is going to be super interesting. And I hope you guys enjoy it here on episode 35. Danny Corrales, the producer of the Emmy-nominated studio show, The Jump on ESPN. All right, he is the producer of the Emmy-nominated studio show on ESPN, The Jump. Danny Corrales joins us on the Business of Social podcast. Danny, thanks so much for the time, man.
Thank you very much for having me. I'm really excited to be connected with you, and obviously through TJ. And
yeah, of course, TJ hooked it up.
I love that pod, by the way. That was a lot of fun to watch.
Good. Yeah, he dropped some knowledge for sure. I always, if you remember on TJ's podcast, the first question is always a somewhat random question. So I'm going to go all the way to the top. Let's say Bob Iger gives you a call tonight and says, Danny, for the rest of the year, you can only talk about one topic on ESPN's The Jump for the rest of the year. What is that topic and why?
Ooh, all right, here we go. It's got to be KD's free agency. I'm just thinking, because for me, it's like, what can I get the most traction out of?
Yeah.
The Warriors' three-peat chances will run out of steam in a couple weeks, most likely. But KD's free agency is really the thing that's going to set the entire NBA, up for the next, who knows how many years. I mean, I guess it's been like 3 years since he joined the Warriors. So figure for the next 3 years, the NBA is going to be essentially determined by where KD goes. And I think the coolest thing about his decision is that he has no wrong decision. I think he can go wherever he wants to go, and I think that everybody's going to understand, even if it's staying in Golden State. I think we'll understand. We're like, yeah, of course. Why would you want to leave that? But then if he leaves to the Knicks, like, well, of course, like, who doesn't want to be a hero of New York?
Yeah,
you win a title for New York.
I'm excited. I know you used to be up in Bristol, so you made the drive, to New York and watching a game. Even I've watched Knicks games where they're not too good, but watching a game at Madison Square Garden, and if that happens, we talked about this, I think, with TJ. It's like, the NBA has done amazing without the Knicks and Lakers the last 6 years or so being good at all. Imagine if the Knicks are popping off again. It'd be amazing for the league.
And it's such an important thing, not even just for the Knicks, but for the Eastern Conference. I think when LeBron left the Eastern Conference, people don't really understand that the first time slot of those NBA doubleheaders took a bump. It's just
huge hit. 25-30% ratings drop, I think.
Absolutely. And the sad thing about it, and the ironic thing about it, is that the East was great this year. It was highly competitive. look at what we have now. We have great playoffs. We have great teams. We have
But
stars.
D'Angelo Russell isn't getting you those casuals, unfortunately.
Exactly. So yes, you're right about the Knicks. I mean, I remember the first time I went to actually the only time I went to a Knicks game. I was the manager for the Arizona basketball team, and we were playing against Louisville in Coaches versus Cancer in '06. And the night before our game, they're like, "Oh, we're gonna go to Madison Square Garden. We got a suite, and we're gonna watch a Knicks game." So everyone's like, "Oh my god, like yeah, hell yeah, we're going to the Knicks
Yeah,
game."
yeah,
And it was Knicks versus Grizzlies. Nobody of consequence was playing, not even Pau Gasol, who was on the Grizzlies.
yeah. Okay.
And I just remember being like, "This is so boring." Like, like we're in
Yeah.
a suite. You would think like first world problems, right? And it was just like so boring. But like, I know that if you get somebody like KD to the Knicks, or even like Zion, which
Yeah.
obviously I don't want to date us, but
Yeah.
but if you were to get somebody like that, it would really change the state of basketball in New York, with the Nets being great, and
Hmm.
also uplift the entire conference, I think.
I love it. So I want to get into your story. Maybe you can just give me like a 60-second background or so, because you and I were talking before the show. You've been at ESPN for 9 years, which we were kind of laughing about in our industry, especially in sports. That's a lifetime. I mean, people usually hop
Yeah.
around every 2 to 3 years, and you definitely said that you've been given new challenges every year or
Yeah.
two, and that's really kept you at ESPN and doing some cool things. So talk a little bit about just quickly, your story and how you ended up at the Jump.
So I came out of college, University of Arizona. I was a manager, like I said, for Lute Olson, and that kind of got me in the door for an interview at ESPN. So then that I turned into a production trainee, production assistant trainee. So
Yeah.
not even a PA. Had to work my way up to being a PA. And
One day I could be, if I just work hard enough, I could be a PA.
if I work hard enough, I could be a PA, and I can trade in my inflatable mattress. And that was kind of like my
Yeah,
first six
exactly.
months in Bristol, right?
And that'll humble you
So
if, with your success now. That's awesome, man.
it's amazing. And the
Yeah.
thing about Bristol too was that like I take this as a compliment, but like Bristol was interesting, or Connecticut in general, because like the coolest place you can go to is work. Like if you wanted
Yes.
to go hang
I just went
out,
to Bristol and driving around, and that's pretty much all you got at ESPN.
and it's not just because it's like, hey, like bars, restaurants, like whatever, like everyone has bars and restaurants, but it's more so because of how cool it is to be at ESPN, and
Yeah.
how fun it is to, I would find myself sticking around, for an hour or two, and like, wait, what am I doing here? Why am
Yeah.
I
Yeah. Yeah.
talking to like my colleagues about Arizona basketball? Like, I need to
Yeah.
go home. But the cool thing about Bristol was that I was able to work on a bunch of shows at first, like most other trainees, Sports Center highlights, prompting and stuff. But it wasn't until I got connected with Sports Nation in 2000, early part of 2010, that really kind of set my career forward. Working with Jamie Horowitz, Kevin Wiles, and their crew, Michelle Beadle, Colin, I was able to really develop content as opposed to execute content, I guess, is kind of the key,
Well,
right?
we've had Nita on the show, who was over at IG, and I know you worked with her. She was talking about Sports Nation too, and really, it's an important show not only for linear but also digital and the sports world, because it was kind of Bleacher Report before Bleacher Report, at
Yeah,
least in that
absolutely.
same time frame. At least what you guys were doing, it was definitely ahead of its time, and you've seen other shows now birthed out of that, whether it's ESPN or other. That definitely kind of started a trend, no doubt.
And the interesting thing about the trend that we started was that it was a trend that, whether or not Sports Nation was around, it was a trend that was going that way already. And
Yeah.
even think about 2010 Twitter, like compared to now, completely different ball
Hmm.
game, right? So for us, we were able to, I think, make a lot of like learn a lot of bad lessons, right? Because like the first thing you get when you get new technology or new resources is the ideas of like, let's just put tweets on air. Let's just cycle through tweets. Let's just, let's go to a Twitter scroll, and stuff like that. And then you kind of get burned because
Yeah.
like, like cuss words, or there's things like that, editorial things. And it was really nice that we were able to kind of learn those things early on, and then those lessons, I think, have shaped the other shows I've worked on. Because after
Yeah.
Sports Nation, I went to Nación ESPN, which is on ESPN, was on ESPN Deportes, RIP as well, or RIP también. And then Lie, Numbers Never Lie, which was like kind of like a statistically based debate show, which was like even then kind of new ground, analytics, right? Like getting the analytics, getting the jocks, getting them together in the same room and discuss that. And that kind of then took me to the Jump, where Twitter's even bigger now, NBA Twitter. Things that we're doing online, videos that we're showing, you got IG Live, you got Snap, you got
Yep.
all these other media outlets that you have to disseminate and that you have to really package in a linear format that is beholden to the standards that ESPN has set for
Yep.
40 years, right?
I was reading a quote that Rachel Nichols said when she was kind of pitching the show internally. And her quote was, "It should feel like sitting around talking about basketball with your friends, but what if one of your friends happened to be Tracy McGrady or Scottie Pippen?" And the reason why I think that's so important as a lifelong basketball junkie, I think a lot of networks, including ESPN, has been trying to go after. I mean, Inside the NBA is kind of on that pedestal, and the Emmys speak for it, and Shaq and Chuck and Kenny. That environment kind of feels like they're in your living room with you,
Yeah.
and I think that's so much more difficult to do than it sounds like. But I really feel, and this is a compliment to you and your whole staff, like the Jump has found a way to get in that rarefied air where I think it does feel like it's natural conversation, it's organic, and it's not too buttoned up and doesn't feel like other shows in the past that have tried to emulate that. So I'm sure you guys, that was a really big thing for you to emulate.
And yeah, absolutely. And I'm really happy that you pulled out that quote from Rachel
Yep.
because, I've heard her say it a few times because it's that important to us. Like, we, I get an opportunity to call Tracy or Scotty, me or Steve Martinez, who's the kind of like the co-producer of I'm sorry, the Jump. Steve Martinez, the co-producer of the Jump. Steve's job every day is to call Tracy or Scotty, or my job is to call them, go through all of the topics we kind of went over with Rachel, because Rachel's like the one we liken to giving her a menu. So in the morning we present her with a menu. It's like we have some appetizers, we have some main dish, we have some
And like
dessert
Ernie Johnson,
video.
she's the traffic cop that has to make sure all this craziness kind of stays on the
Absolutely.
tracks. Yeah.
Absolutely, and she has to make sure that we ask good questions. We have smart questions because that's the thing is you have to commit to the question, to the topic.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you're gonna you'll lose so much nuance. And for us, and for I think for most basketball fans, they're so well versed in the game. Um, Early on, when we started developing the show, we made a clear statement that we want to be a show for NBA fans, not for sports fans who
Mm,
kind of like the NBA, or
yeah.
not for, we don't use first and last names most times. We use nicknames on our graphics.
Interesting.
We make sure that people are getting enough information to be a part of the conversation, but we don't have to show you A, B, C, D, and even with our talent, like Rachel Nichols, Ramona Shelburne, Brian Windhorst, Zach Woj, all of
Yep.
our analysts, like these people know more than I know. So I want them to be in a spot to where they can get the knowledge that they have out, have the
Right.
conversation that they're going to have, after the game in the media dining room, or, in a timeout and stuff. So it's really cool because we really do get to talk to the Scotties and the Tracys the way that you would talk to
Yeah.
some at a barbershop, right? You would say, "Yo,
Yep.
Tracy, like, what do you think about the words about KD? Hey,
Yep.
Tracy, what do you think about the words about KD?"
Yep.
So it makes our job easy in the sense where we can just figure out, what do we care about? Like, what do you care about? What does NBA Twitter care about? And then take those concerns to people who know on both sides of the fence, right?
Yeah, I think so. I'm interested to hear your answer to this next question because I think you being a producer for a linear show, I think you're able to answer this question in an interesting way. So I'll tell you from my standpoint,
Hmm.
I've watched hundreds of segments of The Jump, none of which have been on linear, all of which have been on YouTube. And I'm wondering, as we sit here in 2019, is that a good statement? Is that a bad statement, or somewhere in between?
I would say the fact that you watched that many clips is good, 100%. Wherever you're getting them, I think I'm kind of like platform agnostic in a sense,
Hmm.
and I want to make our shows that way because I do understand that, hey, like, our best our best financial uh position is if somebody tunes in at 3 o'clock Eastern on ESPN, noon Pacific, and watches the whole show and watches
Yeah.
all of our commercials, right? Like, that's just what we want first, right? But it doesn't mean that we don't share dozens of clips from the show on YouTube,
Hmm.
on
I mean,
.com.
immediately. too. I mean, you guys have
Em- oh,
that's been a change I've seen at ESPN over the last 24 months, where it's immediate now.
absolutely. And
Yeah.
the staff that is in charge of like posting YouTube clips, Patrick Dorsey most notably, he is very aggressive. Like he wants to get that time cut even shorter because he
Mm-hmm.
knows that, you know, it's resonating. I mean, we did this one thing with Scotty and Tracy where it was like, how do you defend James Harden's step back? I didn't even ask them the question. I just told them to go in the studio, got them standing up, asked them one question. I walk away. They talk for 7 minutes, and it did like 2 million views on YouTube.
Wow.
And you know, and not everything is going to resonate like that, but it is really nice to know that we can break a linear format and do something that would be really good for a digital audience. And also, I've gotten so much feedback from people like in Australia, in London, in Toronto. Even they're like, we don't have
Mm-hmm.
to jump in Toronto. Like, what are we doing? You know, so you know, it's really cool that YouTube gives us that outlet because NBA fans, like we want to reach the passionate NBA fans wherever they're at, and hopefully through YouTube, through Twitter, through Rachel's platforms, we're expanding our scope, and maybe just maybe if you're tuning into ESPN or something in the middle of the day, maybe that'll make you turn the volume up,
Yeah.
and that's fine too. So I mean I know that there's other people who um, are very interested in the linear specific ratings, but I want to be ready for when they start counting the nonlinear. And I don't necessarily know what that is, but from what I've been seeing, I think we're in a very good position to be at the top of those, near the top of that list.
Yeah, that was gonna be my next question. When you look at success of a segment or a success
Mhm.
of a entire show, how much of it, as we stand here today, is looking at that Nielsen rating the day after, a week after, and how much of it is, damn, we got 2 million on this, T Max Scotty segment.
Yeah, I mean, the way I see it, I think everything is important, and I know that's like such a easy answer, but
Mm-hmm.
you know, we want to do well on the Nielsen ratings. Like we are happy
Yep.
when we're doing well in linear ratings. Those segments are doing better digitally. You know, our that buzz is generated. We see other shows pick up things. Like I mean, seriously, like the ultimate compliment to the show was like if like PTI picks up something we say, because to me that's it, right? Like
Yep.
that's the standard. So if we say something that's interesting enough or provoking enough on our show that PTI uses it as a topic in a 30-minute show, that to me is like a big win. And one of the cool things that I try to keep an eye on is sometimes like I'll get a note like right after we do a segment. It'll be like, you know, Scotty, this yesterday show is like Scotty says the Warriors need KD to win the finals. And that thing got posted on ESPN.com probably by the end of that commercial break.
Hmm.
So that to me is validation, not necessarily like that ultimate like ratings numbers and you know stuff like that, but those are the little validations where we're like, okay, cool, we're hitting the right tones, we're asking the right questions. Other people are seeing our content as valuable, and for me, I want to have the best ratings. I want the show to have the best ratings, and that's the you know you get the most runway when your ratings are very good linear. But I also am looking at the overall big picture and just making sure that we are doing our part to put us in a good position.
How has social media changed the way you produce? And I asked that because I brought this example up a ton. I feel like late night TV right now, Jimmy Fallon and Jimmy Kimmel, they're starting to produce these segments for the next morning
Yeah.
on YouTube, on social.
Yep.
You see, I noticed with I think Jimmy Kimmel, he's asked every major person like if they know Michael Jordan, Kevin Hart on Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson on the first time he ever played against Michael Jordan, because they know that
Yep.
keyword works really well on YouTube, and I've clicked them every time. Um,
Exact same.
so for you, I mean, there may be a segment that on the linear at noon may not. It's good content, but it's not the most
Yeah.
amazing content at that. But it has so much legs for now in the future. Are you thinking about that as you guys produce a show daily?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that we take that into consideration because usually, I mean, for us, the best topics are going to win, the best questions, the biggest stories. But if you're not thinking about how your segments and how your conversations are going to play outside of your linear format, you're really, I think, doing that content a disservice because
Yep.
really that one topic that Jimmy Fallon or Kimmel does, or that bit, or carpool
Yeah.
karaoke, right?
Exactly.
Carpool karaoke is a freaking show. Like somebody
Yes.
came up with a segment like, hey, it'd be cool if we did carpool karaoke. Like, great,
Now
let's
it's a
do a
show.
show. Let's
Yep.
make $100 million.
Yep.
That. So, and ultimately, that's what got them on the map. Like that cut them. That cut through. And I
Mm-hmm.
remember actually, Corden came on Sports Nation before he launched, and because it wasn't that big of a deal, right?
Right.
Just a
Right.
guy. He was amazing. I met him, and I'm like, oh my god, this is like the most charming, nicest guy I've ever met in my life. Like I'm rooting. Well, I'm rooting for him to succeed, right? And it was really carpool karaoke that just set that show off, and people still don't watch. I mean, who am I to say, but most people still don't get to catch it linear in
Live.
live
Right.
space.
Right.
We all know it, we all love it, and we'll all stream it. And when they have
Mm-hmm.
McCartney or Beyonce or Adele, we're locked, right? And I think that's an important part for any linear show, because you have to cut through in some way. You can't just be the next show talking about the same topic that the last show
Yep.
was talking about.
Yep.
And sometimes it's a device. Sometimes for us, it's talent. For us, it's Rachel, it's Tracy, it's our writers or reporters, it's their knowledge. But we also will have fun. And one other thing that Rachel says, and she repeats a lot, which I love it, is she's like, I don't want to do presentation television. I want it to be fun. I want it to be raw. But as a TV producer, I want to do the best presentation
Yeah.
television, knowing that we can sacrifice certain things for the content. And for me, it's fun because like I get to play like the straight person, straight man. I get to be like, hey, I know you guys are having fun talking about the Lakers coaches for 20 minutes, but we kind of have to run a commercial break,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
maybe, right? So it to me, it's fun because I guess we get to really, really try things, and the fun things that we come up with, and when it goes off the rails, those are the things that will resonate digitally. Whereas like another show may be like, whoa, 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 like this isn't what we had planned
Well, and,
for this space.
and this is super granular and kind of inside baseball, but I was even thinking on a daily basis, are you trying to get an evergreen segment in there, i.e., who was better, Kobe or T Mac, or, some of those segments that can live on for the next 2 years on digital? Or because I think that's important for the shelf life too. If you're talking
Yeah,
about Katie's free agency next year, nobody's gonna be watching that video anymore.
absolutely. Not necessarily. We're not necessarily putting an effort on keeping things evergreen, but we do appreciate how that stuff lives. And if you don't understand it, or if you're not, if you don't appreciate the fact that a Scotty story time on Michael Jordan could rack up 10
Yes.
million views in three
Yes.
years, then you're kind of missing the boat, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I like the idea of having our YouTube people identify those moments in the show, and they're so good at that because they'll be like, hey, like I think this is gonna go. And they'll even send notes in the show and be like, if you guys can keep them for 5 more minutes,
Yeah.
talk about that. And I remember we were in an all-star game, Scotty talked about his first all-star, how nervous he was. And I got a note and it's like, hey, it was like a 2-minute show thing, which is amazing, right? Good 2 minutes of TV. But then I got a note saying, like, is there any way we can get Scotty to stick around and just talk about that for like
Hmm.
5 minutes, 10 minutes? Because we understand that, like, we're fans. Like, I want to hear that stuff.
We love that.
So
Absolutely.
I definitely want to keep those moments and really try to find them. And I think the trick is I'm always saying, like, what's the peg, right? What's the peg? Like there has to be something out there that we can frame this conversation. Otherwise, every day it's who's the goat, LeBron or MJ?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
come on, you know what I mean? So that's hard too, because you do that sometimes. Like, not gonna say I've never had that debate on any of the
Yeah.
shows that I've worked on, but you try to avoid.
When it's a slow news day, you can always throw that one out there and keep the ratings up.
We've been doing year-round shows for the last 2 years, and we were always worried, like, what are we gonna do in August and September? And
Yeah.
the answer is, you figure it out.
Well, and listen, as a being born and raised in LA and being a Lakers fan, like
Yeah,
the content that you guys are producing and all the ESPN shows around LeBron's free agent, I couldn't get enough of it, man. Like I was actually like
yeah,
slapping myself, like stop watching this, because like it was just like an update every 4 hours on. Well, Maverick is saying this, and Clutch Sports and
yeah.
sources are saying And it
No.
was just I was just glued to my television. It's crazy, and you've seen this too with the NBA. The drama of the offseason when they're actually not playing basketball is almost overtaking the
It
actual basketball on the court. KD's storyline is bigger than the Bucks, potentially making the finals. It just is, and that's good for Adam Silver and I think the league.
Yeah, and right now we're in this sweet spot of the games matter and the storylines matter.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me is like the most fun because sometimes it is hard. Like you don't want to neglect when Kemba drops 50. You don't want to neglect when a team that shouldn't have won went and gotta beat the Warriors, right?
Yep.
And you could just say like, but it's November, who cares? So
Yeah.
like, but we care and we want to care about the game and off and outside the game, right? And I think that's kind of where you find that sweet spot because if it gets too transactional and you start to like lose sight of what's at stake in the finals, what's at stake, in these games, right? If you start to lose that, then I think you're sacrificing so much good content, but it's
Yep.
about that balance of being able to say like, okay, cool, we're going to be at the finals, we're going to be doing pregame shows, Western Conference Finals and finals. It doesn't mean we might not talk about Kyrie's free agency. It doesn't mean we might not talk about the Lakers coaching situation or the fact that
Yeah.
whatever that is. But I think we're at our best when it ultimately turns back into like KD's going to the Knicks. Will the Knicks win a title for the first time in 50 years? Like that is where all these roads should lead to, hopefully.
I think there's obviously haters and trolls and things like that that say you're talking too much about LeBron or too much about those topics you mentioned.
Definitely.
How do you balance that line? Because I even think towards the end of the season, if the Brooklyn Nets were on fire or the Kings were trying to itch in to make the playoffs, but the better storyline as a basketball junkie is, did the Anthony Davis rumors ruin the Lakers, or can
Yeah.
LeBron regain the locker room? And you're talking about a team that's not in the playoffs, that's not playing well, but it's just that drama of that is so much more juicier. Is there debates in these writing rooms of like, what do we do because we got this good story over here, but this is going to be the one people care about?
Absolutely, every day.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of the key to the show is that you kind of have to figure out where are you at every day. Like,
Mm-hmm.
um, whatever we assume we're going to do tomorrow's show, things change. And how important is tomorrow's show? Like, how important is Eastern Conference Game 1 and tomorrow's show? Very important, obviously. How
Yep.
important is what happened tonight? Also, how important is whatever news? Like today we led the show with the Sixers keeping Brett Brown. It's an important story. One would say like, how do you not lead with Game 1 of the Western Conference Finals, right? But the good thing for us, and the good thing about actually a linear platform, is that we have plenty of time to do everything
Yeah.
and to do it well, right? So if I have an hour long show, which is really 44 minutes, I can balance it out hopefully in a way where both sides kind of get what they want. If
Get the
people are
love. Yeah.
tuning in to figure out what the Blazers could do to beat the Warriors in game 1, like hopefully they'll stick around long enough to get that.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't mean that the Sixers offseason isn't super important or the news value of Brett Brown coming back. Like that's kind of the other thing we have to weigh in is like where's the news coming from? And obviously with Woj being here, there's a lot of news coming in, and we want to be breaking news while having these conversations that we feel is a thing that people really want from the jump, but we want them to be able to say like, hey, like Rachel can come in and do a Magic monologue, Orlando Magic, not Magic Johnson, but like
Yeah.
she'll be like, hey, let's give Orlando Magic some love, and like hell yeah, let's do it.
Yeah.
Because the Magic fan that was like pissed off every day about seeing LeBron, hey, guess what, you're gonna get a 3-minute
Right.
monologue where Rachel Nichols herself is going to write the hell out of it,
Yeah.
and we're going to really focus on your team. And hopefully, the teams and players, and I hope they feel, at least people who watch it regularly, obviously, because every one day, one off, you never know. But I hope that everybody, even the teams, feel like they get a fair shot at the spotlight, and even with the criticism too, because a lot of teams don't want you to talk about them when things are bad.
Yeah.
So, don't pile on when it's bad. Don't ignore them when it's good. And really try to develop storylines for every team, because really the NBA, you know, it's so much fun right now that even like the bad teams with like the tank wars, stuff
Mhm.
like that. Even the bad teams are kind of interesting. I mean, like shit, we talk about the damn Suns, like,
That's saying a lot.
right? Like
Saying a lot.
like, but they're so interesting, and we are going to keep talking about the Suns because they're interesting.
So I think what's interesting, like looking at inside the NBA, like casuals, my grandma, my aunt, what have you, they know that Shaq and Chuck are on some basketball show and they talk basketball. I think this is a great moment. I want to see your thoughts on this, but Paul Pierce obviously got trolled for his statement on the Bucks being done after Celtics won Game 1. And I think that's as a marketer, I think that's phenomenal brand awareness. I think it's amazing for people to know that Paul Pierce is on a show talking about this stuff. So I think just for brand awareness and Paul Pierce and his comments and things like that. I mean, what did you think of a moment like that? Is that kind of music to your ears, or you wish that wasn't something that kind of took off virally?
I Knowing Paul and working with him,
Yeah.
he's somebody who is just he really really wants to have fun, and I think that's the key, right? Is that
And was
he's
that on
have
the jump or was it on the countdown
That
show?
was
I
on
forget.
Countdown. It was on
Okay.
Countdown. So he
Yeah.
did it on Countdown after the Celtics beat the Bucks, and
Yep.
I mean, to be honest, I was kind of feeling that the Bucks weren't really going to get that done.
Yeah.
So he said it, and then on Monday's show, he's on the jump with Jackie McMullen. Jackie McMullen like just calls him out, like, Paul, are you serious? What would you do if I said that the Celtics series was over after you won one game in the series? Like, so it was really nice because she challenged him,
Yep.
and to me, it was a great moment on Countdown that I enjoyed as a fan and for the entertainment value of it. And I kind of knew that like Paul was putting himself out there, going to be on a hill, whether or
Yep.
not it worked or not. But it was really nice to see then that conversation evolve into like somebody challenging him, like, Paul, you really feel this way? And then Paul's like, hell yeah, I feel this way. So then it's like, cool, now we're doubling down on it. And then to see how it unfolded, it's really funny. I mean,
Yeah.
to me, like, the Countdown crew has done a great job of interjecting the personalities of Paul, Jalen, and Chauncey and Michelle Beadle, who I worked with a lot of Sports Nation,
Hmm.
so much of her. I think they're doing a great job. And then to me, Paul is having fun. He's loose, and none of this is like things you would take that seriously. In
I just think
like,
like one. I think there's a huge, and maybe some people don't look like this way, but for me in social as a marketer, when you start becoming part of pop culture, or you start getting
yeah,
made fun of, or you start being a part of memes, I feel like you've kind of made it in a sense. Like
yeah,
now what he says on the Jump or ESPN, whether you agree, disagree, indifferent, you kind of want to tune in now. And I think even Chuck said on Inside the NBA that the Warriors are done without KD and they're going to lose
yeah,
against the
exactly.
Rockets, and you almost want to tune in like he has to eat his words now, and that kind of makes that. I think it just makes great television. So I think it was kind of a cool moment for Pierce as a commentator, but also for the Jump and Countdown to kind of make it more part of the lexicon type deal.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
Charles called that the Blazers were going to make the finals, and everybody thought he was crazy.
Yeah.
But he might, he could theoretically back his way into like that take, which is hilarious because nobody's going to take this seriously. Like, I think one of the things we try to avoid on the Jump is predicting games, right? Because
Hmm.
if once you predict the game, like that's kind of the last thing you should probably
Yeah.
would do in a TV show, right? Because then what? Where do you go from there? So we try to avoid it, but we'll never stand in somebody's way as far as like, we might have a researcher say like, I don't know, Paul, you might want to see how the Bucks react in game two,
Right.
and da da da. But all we're doing is trying to make their arguments stronger. Like kind of like trial by fire, right? Like if you could stay in front of us and we don't, just crush you, or if you could stay in front of Jackie McMullen,
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
while she's challenging you, then it's cool because it feels very authentic,
I
and I
also
think
like, but I
that's what
also like
makes it
leaning
cool.
into it. I think Stephen A. predicted the wrong finals winner like 7 years in a row,
Yeah, he did.
and Drake has definitely leaned into like I'm the curse, so I'm gonna wear your team's logo. Like he wore the Sixers shorts in Game 7. I don't know. I
Didn't
think it's just
Poppy?
it's.
Who was the baseball? Was it Poppy or was it Era? Somebody was just like guessed the whole postseason last year wrong,
So
and
then you start tuning
but
in,
it's
hoping he doesn't
hilarious.
pick your team, or so that because like it's more likely. Yeah, it's. I think it's cool.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
to that, because I mean you've produced a lot of shows at ESPN. I've always been fascinated with the process to choose talent because some of the biggest names in sports may not be able to articulate their opinions, may be kind of boring on camera, while others may not have the bigger name, but they break it down really eloquently type deals. So how have you dealt with that over your career? Because I'm sure there's been a lot of people that you've tried to work with and maybe it just didn't work out. And how do you ultimately kind of pick who's going to be on TV?
Well, I think it's important for us to really try to figure out what are you trying to get out of these people, because there's like, it's like you're not going to ask Michael Jordan to telestrate the last play of the
Yeah,
you
yeah,
know Kawhi's game winner, right? You're
yeah,
not gonna like, hey Michael, go up to the touchscreen and take us
yeah.
through it. Like, you're just not, and like, not that he couldn't, or he could obviously do whatever the hell he wants, but you have to figure out what you're gonna get out of them. And there's certain people who are like, yo, I like breaking down tape. I remember even my
Tim
guy
Legler does a good job of that.
Tim Legler,
Yeah.
absolutely. I was gonna say my guy in college football. God, I'm blanking on his name. Trevor. Oh, I forget. There was a guy who used to be an analyst on College Football Live, and
Okay.
I feel so bad I butchered his name. But he used to be in the newsroom cutting his own tapes.
That's
And to
awesome.
me, it's like, yo, if that's the level of you're at, I
Mm-hmm.
want you to do that on TV. If you're John King, do that on TV. But if you're Scottie Pippen, don't worry about it. Like,
Yeah. You got
you're
six
like,
championships. You have a unique perspective of what it takes to win and things like that. Yeah.
you could skip the touchscreen telestrator portion of the trip, but it's also important to tee them up specifically and tee them up in something that they're going to be able to answer realistically. Like, I'm not going to be like, hey, so what kind of defense should the Bucks run in game
Right.
one? It's like, maybe they know the answer, but it's also going to be like, hey, how much pressure do you think Giannis feels right now for the Milwaukee, for them? Scotty, do you think the Warriors have enough to complete this three-peat? You've done it twice,
Mm-hmm.
So I remember early on we had a conversation about, I won't say the talent or the people I talked to because it was kind of not cool. But the
Confidential.
conversation was like, they're like, well, this person's not great on TV. So like, what are you gonna ask him? I'm like, I'm gonna ask him about the Warriors, and they're like,
Yeah.
oh, so like softballs? I'm like, as opposed to a slider in the dirt, you know what I
Yeah,
mean? Kind of
exactly.
like, because that's the thing too. Is I think as producers we get very much caught up with what we can do, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, I've been here. Actually, I just did the math myself. I've been here 11 years, which is crazier than
Love
9.
it.
But yeah, so 08 to 2019, I was like, wow, this is crazy. But I know what ESPN's capable of. I know all the technology we have. I mean, most of it. There's always new stuff, but it's not about what I feel comfortable doing. It's about what the talent feels comfortable doing. And as long as you put the talent in
Yeah.
comfortable positions where their authority, where their experience can shine, you're doing a great job. And even with the reporters, I'm not going to ask a reporter, what's Giannis' state of mind entering game one. I'm going to ask a reporter a question about reporting. What's Malcolm Brogdon's status? Is he going to start? He's come off the bench. What is Budenholzer saying about Giannis's preparation that's different? So being able to have the right question framed in the right way, is everything. Because look at me and you, we're having an NBA conversation. Neither of
Right.
us play basketball,
Yeah.
but if you want to talk about KD to the Knicks and what we think about
Yep.
the Lakers, one thing that we saw we say on Sports Nation, because it was very much different in content, was heart over head, right? Like, what is how should uh Frank Vogel feel having Jason Kidd on the staff?
Yeah.
You can answer that. How should he feel?
Mm-hmm.
Scared?
How should Frank? I think he feels like, looking over his shoulder every single day is how I think he feels, which is not a good place to be in.
Yeah, like, and then I'll ask you, like, do you think Frank Vogel's defensive philosophy is going to work with the Lakers? Like, I don't. Okay,
Yeah, exactly.
so you might know, but it's like that's the idea, is because we're all fans and we're
Mm-hmm.
making TV for fans, like, right, like, as much as I love for you know the players to watch our show and stuff like that, like, they're fans too,
But
and
that's the
they
interesting thing you just touched on, because I think in order for somebody to care or to disagree or to say, "Yep, I agree as well," you have to kind of focus more on the feels more than the X's and O's, because I can't really speak to, like you said, to Tom Thibodeau breaking down the defensive scheme of what Frank Vogel may or may not do with LeBron at 6'8". But if you tell me, if he starts talking about how, as a coach, you should feel if a big name assistant is hired at
yeah.
the same time you are, then I can either agree, disagree, or yell at him.
Exactly, and we can all trace back to that whatever that feeling is, being doubled up in the role. We all kind of can go back to that. And I think that was the beauty of like working on like a show like Sports Nation, where is that, we had Marcellus, who's an NFL ex-player, but he's talking about NBA, he's talking about MLB. We're talking about, he has to be able to talk about a baseball
What
fight.
was the better dunk, dunk A or dunk B? I mean, anybody can play that game. Yeah.
Exactly. But
Yeah.
but the idea would be like, having those conversations about like, well, take me in the locker room. How did you approach your teammate when they called a team meeting? Then he's like, okay, cool. Like I remember that. So, it doesn't necessarily always 100% work, because there is a lot of breaking down, there's a lot of X's and O's, but I do think when you get into these inherent questions, um, we all kind of want a seat at the table, right? Even the fans kind of want to be able to get in on the conversation. You want to be able to to be able to challenge T-Mac and be like, I don't know, Tracy, you
Yeah.
you're not picking the Rockets, but I think that they got this. Like,
Yeah.
we should feel, confident to do that, because I think we all share that shared passion in the game.
I asked Katie Daly a similar question. And I think John Skipper and Bill Simmons talked about it on their recent podcast on The Ringer. When you're a partner with the league and you're doing an NBA show, the same way there was an issue, obviously, with Bill Simmons talking about the NFL on the Dan Patrick show and got suspended and things like that. There is that fine balance too, where you're in partnership with the league. You're talking about NBA stories. Does that ever? I mean, and I know you can answer this however you would like, but does that ever kind of go into the topics or what's off limits, what's on limits when you're actually a league partner and have rights with the league when you're talking about the league?
Absolutely. I mean, I
Yeah.
think you'd be silly if you didn't take into consideration, how the league would feel about a potential topic. I think the most important thing is to be fair.
Yeah.
And Rachel's the greatest person to be steering that ship, because she's the one she's the one that Adam Silver has got her number. He's not texting me after the show, you know what I
Okay.
mean? And I hope he doesn't, because I hope everything's good, right? But she's so good about being fair, and she knows, like, she knows when criticism could be turned up a little bit. She knows when it could be tapered off a little bit. And I think that's kind of the important thing, is that for us, we have to be able to look these players in the eye, potentially. Like, we're going to go to the Western Conference Finals and the finals.
Yeah.
Like, we can't, we have to make sure that they can at least look at us and say, like, you guys are asking tough questions, but they're fair. And it's not just the league, it's the players, it's the coaches. You know what I mean? It's the franchises. Funny story. I did this Clippervention show for Sports Nation with Marcellus, because he's a big Clippers fan, so we
Yeah,
wanted.
he's
So
obnoxious. As a Laker
we
fan,
we
Marcellus
wanted
is.
to stage a Clippervention for him. So we got Dr. Drew, and I think this is after like Blake Griffin got hurt a couple years ago, and it was just bad, right? So we did this whole Clippervention where we're trying to talk Marcellus out of being, a Clippers fan. Which, on the one hand, you'd be like, hey, we did a 30-minute show on the Clippers, but on the other hand, the Clippers were not happy about it. so
Yes.
so granted, like, it wasn't meant as like disrespect towards that team. Like, I like the Clippers, and
So do you approach it
more
like
than.
as long as you could defend it, like, hey, the reason we did this and kind of have a legit, and that could
Absolutely,
even
it's like.
be, talking about Adam Silver. Has he lost his touch? Should he have, handled this issue better? As long as it's like a fair, discussion, then you can always, fall back on it and explain why you went that direction.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
then that's the key, is like, can you explain it not just to like your audience or Twitter, but can you explain it face to face, right?
Yeah.
Like, can you go to these people and have a conversation with them and be like, okay, look, I know I was unfair, or I know that I was criticizing you, but it was fair in the moment. We were talking more about the action, not the person. Those types of things, I think it's important you just have to be aware of it, because ultimately, our show does better the more people like the NBA, right? So we want the league to be, we want the league to look good.
That's a good take that I wish more social marketers would think about before they went into their strategy or posted a piece of content. If I saw this person face to face, could I explain, like, listen, I know you're not probably a big fan of this piece of content, but it's funny, it's part of pop culture, da 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 da. But if you're just totally trolling somebody and just killing them on social over and over and over again, I mean, literally, kids under 18 know Michael Jordan more for the crying face emoji than what he
Yeah.
did for the Bulls. And it's like, I mean, gosh, I mean, it's over. It's enough. That went on for like 2.5 years every single moment, So That's actually, I think, a good question that everybody should ask is, could I explain this decision face to face to the person I'm talking about?
And that's the wonderful part of working with Rachel, because she really does she makes us think about everything we're asking. And sometimes it's not always, we're not always perfect. We've made mistakes. We made mistakes on Sports Nation, because that
Hmm.
was like, we want to troll people, we want to
Yeah,
get
yeah,
them
yeah.
the skin, we want to create a stir, right? For the jump, we're not trying to create like a stir, we're trying to raise awareness for the league, make people more excited about the league, make more excited about the games, and even when I was back, my media career started in high school. I went to a high school in Tucson, Arizona, Pueblo High, that had its own TV station. So every day we would do like a morning show, like a 7 minute morning show. And even back then, it's like you can't just like talk crap about the quarterback and then be like, "Hey, what's up, dude?" Like,
Yeah,
so
exactly.
like that accountability, I think, is really important, and it's something that not all shows have to worry about, because not every show is a partner with the league. Not every show is
Yeah.
invited to these huge things, but I think it's ultimately made our content better. And I think a lot of people would probably think it's the opposite, but in reality, you're going to pay for the low blows in some way. And if you want to take low hanging fruit, you'll run out
Hmm.
quickly, right?
I love that. I love that. You worked with Jamel Hill on Numbers Never Lie, which eventually went into His and Hers. And I don't know why I'm fascinated with this topic, and maybe it's just me, but I just found and it goes to social media, right? Like somebody's tweet on Twitter can cause this national outrage about an entire network. And I know ESPN's the elephant in the room, and the big guy out there, but just how that whole thing turned. Why do you think that? I guess every everybody that's talent at ESPN, like there's this microscope on every tweet they send, and I mean, I'm sure you've noticed that in your
Yeah.
career for 11 years so far.
I mean, it's kind of where we're at right now. I think Twitter was always going to be a problematic tool for people who want it to be problematic. I used to have
Mm-hmm.
this rule on social media where it's like only positive stuff, right? Because if you're only
Yeah.
doing positive stuff, it's like the boringest follow ever. But
Right.
but you'll never get in trouble, right? Because like snarkiness and
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, straight up just like being upset and ripping
Or
like
a controversial topic that you're
all
leaning
those
into.
things.
Yeah. Yeah.
Absolutely. So unfortunately, I'm not necessarily like practicing that style as much anymore, but
Yeah.
I still think about it in everything I do. I mean, the last thing I want to do is to take away from the show, the brand, the network with some stupid thing that I think in my head, right? And Jamel is somebody who I feel a lot of like sympathy for, because we do care about Jamel. We
Of
want to know
course.
what Jamel thinks. Like, we
Yeah.
even now we even more so now we want to know what Jamel thinks, and she's
Yeah.
so smart, and I think the world of her. And I could see how for her it must have been so difficult to be as quiet as she was. I'll say people
Right.
want to focus on what she did say, but I personally think about the thousands of tweets she could have sent in the process.
Mm-hmm.
And granted, like, I'm not one to try to like, you know, rock the boat in that sense. I'm just a
Right.
producer. My best gift is probably behind the camera and just being, removed from our content, just because I enjoy, building up the profiles of my talent. Like, I'm not Tracy, I'm not Sky, I'm not Rachel, I'm not
Mm-hmm.
Brian, I'm not Woj. So, it'll have to go down a pretty long list to where you get people who care about my
But
opinion,
to your
right?
point, and Katie talked about this too. I mean, there could be a controversial subject where you say, I don't know, something about Kevin Durant, and it's like ESPN producer of the Jump.
Absolutely.
So I mean that can, I mean, it could people. What I'm saying is, because you have ESPN in your title, I just feel like with other networks, whether it's Fox or Turner or whatever, that headline doesn't really speak to it. But I guess because it's Disney proper, if it's ESPN's blank 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 says blank, it can make headlines, which is kind of
Absolutely.
scary on a daily basis. Yeah.
And it's also kind of it's the problem of being at the worldwide leader, right? It's ESPN. I mean, I'm sure Bill said a million hotter
Yeah,
thing
yeah.
on the Ringer podcast, but you ultimately kind of you hit that ceiling of like, okay, cool, like, this is the Ringer, like he should be controversial. This is
Right.
where we go for fun. But it's definitely something that I think about. I mean, I like to think I think twice before I tweet. I mean, I
Yeah.
know that that's not really what the platform's made for. Shout out to TJ, and everybody at Twitter. But it's fun, right? I mean, I look at other people who I'm very much amazed by the people who know that that spotlight's on them and that pressure's on them, and they still engage in that discourse.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing, and I really appreciate the fact that a lot of, not just our talent, but a lot of talent in general, aren't too scared to engage, aren't
Right.
too scared to participate. Because I think the worst thing in the world would be if you had all these talent, not just us, but if you have all these talent who aren't engaging and aren't participating, like it would change how we watch these games. It would change
Yeah.
how we interact with these people. And I'm happy that for the most part we're able to live in both worlds, even though that other world isn't necessarily
Yeah, but I
making
think
you
it's
any
interesting that
money.
you say that because it's a fine line. I think everybody has to balance from, like you said, from Stephen A. down to the producer, down to the business owner, down to the
Absolutely.
employee. You have to
Down to the
understand, like,
PAs.
yeah, exactly. You have to
I
understand
tell
it's
PAs, I'm like, they clap back at people who talk about the show. I'm like, yo, don't.
careful. Yeah,
Just don't. Like it,
and
because I get it. Like you're proud, and why don't you talk about the Lakers all the damn time? It's like,
yeah,
but it's like, just don't. Like, it's not worth
yeah,
it.
yeah. All right, I'll get you some rapid fire questions to get you out of here.
All right.
What is the one social or digital tool that you could not live without?
Twitter, Twitter. Just because from a news aggregation standpoint, I mean, it's so much faster than anything else as far as being able to get news and
Yep.
disseminate things that are happening. Not that you only go there, because we have an amazing assignment desk I'll take them the craziest things I find on Twitter, and they'll figure out whether we should go with it. But definitely can't live without that.
From the jump perspective, what social platforms, we talked about YouTube a little bit, but what social platforms seem to be working the best right now to engage an audience on the digital side?
Definitely YouTube and
Hmm.
Twitter, because Rachel, we made a decision when we launched the jump that we wanted to amplify Rachel's handle, as opposed to creating a show jump handle. So there is no
Interesting.
jump show handle.
Okay.
There's a jump fan page, which is ran by somebody who does not work at ESPN, and they're
Wow.
so dedicated. I give them so much credit, because literally, like, you would think we had like a social media team doing
But you
this
know
stuff.
what though, man? That person might mess around and get hired if you guys choose to, go the jump. So
To be
I love the
honest, like,
hustle.
I don't have the power to hire that person, but I would say anybody who's looking for somebody to manage their social or their brand, look at the Jump fan page
Wow.
site.
There you
That
go.
person, they're
You
very
don't
much
have
on
the
top
power
of
to
it.
hire them ESPN, but you may have just got them hired from someone else that's listening. So I
They
like
they
that.
deserve it. Trust me. When you see it, like, they do daily show recaps, and I'm like, how do you how do you do
That's
this?
funny.
But yeah,
Um, in our industry, FOMO is such a major thing. Everything's moving so fast on digital and NBA Twitter. It's hard to keep up with all the storylines. You mentioned Twitter. Is there anything else that you would recommend social media and marketers and producers read or listen to stay up to date on everything that's going on in
well,
media?
I would say definitely. I think podcasts, like the podcasts that we're doing on ESPN, the
Hmm.
True Hoop podcast, Woj podcast, Zach Lowe's, those are so useful, because those they're having conversations that are like 2 to 3 days ahead of the news window.
Will you listen to that
They're
and sometimes get ideas for segments just by,
absolutely, because
yeah,
that's where you really get all the nuance from them. And one of the things we love to do in the jump is to give a question, and then they'll answer it, and I won't know what they're saying, but like, I'm like, wow, I didn't know that. But then you'll listen to the pods, and you'll be like, wait a minute, how come you didn't say that on our show? You know what I
yeah,
mean? Like, you'll be
yeah,
annoyed. You'll be like, we talked about that like
yeah,
yesterday. Where was that? But I think the pods that we're doing, and even like even with the jump podcast, actually, I should plug that, because
yeah.
a lot of people are actually just listening to the podcast of the jump,
Is that
as
just
their
an
way of
audio
getting
version
the
of the
show.
linear show?
Just an audio, yep, audio version on ESPN radio, on the ESPN podcast app. So, people are like being able to like hear the conversation, and hopefully the conversations are playing as well,
That
just in audio.
That's one thing that
I
I
think.
don't think enough people are doing is when you look at the jump as the macro content, and then now you have the audio version. You can even transcribe it for articles.
Yep.
Then you can cut highlights for social. I think a lot of people create, even if it's just on digital, you create a show like we're doing right now, and there's an ability for just the audio version. You can transcribe it. You can upload the whole version to YouTube. You can cut highlights, and one piece of content like you guys do for 45 minutes can turn into literally 57 pieces of micro content.
Absolutely.
So it's smart you guys are doing that for sure. And then finally, if you could recommend anybody in your network that you think would provide value or be a really good guest on the show to drop some knowledge for the listeners, anybody come to mind in your network, that'd be a good
So,
listen.
I would say, all right, let me think, because there's a lot of people who I definitely come to mind when I think of it. But I would say Patrick Dorsey, who actually is in charge of our YouTube channel, just because it's come up so much, and I think because of that platform is kind of so new back to ESPN, because there was a time when we weren't.
You weren't even allowed to post, yeah.
Absolutely right. So
Yeah.
there's like, and even for me, it kind of makes me sad, because there's like this whole like
Archive.
archive of like old Sports Nation, like 101 disrespectful shows, and all this stuff that we lost. That so
I
now
feel
we're
like
kind of
that
like,
should be re-uploaded in an archive at
oh,
some point, hopefully.
I've asked. I'm like, can we bring that stuff back? Because like
Yeah.
I know from a sharing standpoint, the way you share that is just so much easier than to share like from even like ESPN.com, things like that. So
Right.
he's somebody I really have talked to a lot,
Okay.
because of where we stand in this space right now. I see a future that could be more geared toward how are you guys doing on YouTube?
Yep.
How are you guys doing over the top on the ESPN app?
Mm-hmm.
Which, by the way, you can catch the jump on the ESPN anytime. So we're not just beholden. Even our linear.
Are you guys
So
behind the paywall, or is it free on the
it's
ESPN
behind the
app?
pay. It's behind the
The Plus,
paywall.
yeah.
Yeah. Oh no, no, not the Plus paywall. You just need cable. If you have
Okay.
cable, you can watch the
Oh,
jump anytime.
authenticate. Gotcha.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I think it's important too that people understand that that's available, because I tell this to a lot of people, because I've worked in daytime TV for so many years. Is that like most of the times when like if my friends are like, "Hey, I watched the jump today," I'm like, "Is everything good? Like
Yeah. Did you get
you're not
fired?
at work?" Exactly. That's like my first
Yeah.
talk, like noon local. So definitely, I would say Patrick would be a great resource.
Awesome, man. I'll have to hit you up for that recommendation as always. All right, I would roll my R's if I could do it. Danny Corrales, thanks so much. Once again, congratulations on being nominated for the Emmy as well, and all your good work at the jump. I really think you guys are, I'm not just saying this because you're on it, but you guys are killing it, and definitely doing some good work. So thanks so much for the time, man.
I appreciate it. Our staff appreciates it.
Yeah,
Just like with the Emmy and all that, we just are happy that NBA fans are happy with our show, because that's really what we are. It's
that was
like
the goal.
I grew up watching Inside NBA,
Yep.
Inside Stuff, all those
Yep.
shows, and the idea that I can work on a show that's being produced for the 13-year-old me, and that hopefully
It's
the
awesome.
13-year-old me likes it. That's awesome.
Shout out to Ahmad Rashad, my man.
Oh my
What do you
God.
guys to say?
Yes. And Summer, right?
And he never ages. I saw a picture of him yesterday, and he's like literally
That
the same from '93. So
he needs to do more work. We need to get him on more
get him
TV.
on, man. Get him on. That's
Let's
next.
go. Jump.
All right, Danny. Thanks so much, brother.
Very nice talking to you.
All right. Danny Corrales, he had some really amazing things to say, and I think every show I come away with one or two nuggets that I didn't really have going into this show, which is why I do this show, and hopefully you guys listen. And listen, I think I pulled a few things out. One was focusing on the feels. I never really thought about that way, but if you debate a subject that anybody can have a opinion on, it's going to get you a lot more legs. So if you're talking about, the box and one defense that the Warriors are running against the Rockets, it's interesting for a basketball fan to see that and to hear that. But they're not really going to have, they may not have an opinion either way. They may just kind of be somewhat intrigued. But if you say, how should Frank Vogel feel about the Lakers hiring Jason Kidd and obviously looking like he may take over after 3 years and always looking over his shoulder is something that everybody can get behind. And I like the fact that he said that, focusing on more how people feel rather than really breaking down the X's and O's, which is really smart. I really loved, and I think a lot of you social marketers out there should focus on this. Could you explain this face to face? Listen, if Adam Silver made a bad decision and somebody, did some domestic abuse off the court and only got 1 game suspension, I think you have every right to question that as a producer at the Jump. I think you can say, did Adam Silver get this right? Should the punishment have been harsher? Was he too lax? Should he look back and in the future focus on really making sure this is something that the NBA gets behind? And I think you can explain that to Adam Silver. Like, listen, I think the punishment didn't fit the crime, and we really wanted to talk about that and hopefully spark debate in the community, what have you. But if you're just trolling on Adam Silver because he's a bald dude like me or something, it just doesn't. What are you going to do? It's just it's something that you need to kind of focus on. I think social marketing is a lot about snarkiness, like he mentioned, and there's a lot of trolls out there. And I think it's important, if you're pressing play on your handles respectively, that you just, do that check, because I think it's really important. And a lot of social marketers maybe don't do it more so than the TV producers. And then I'm always fascinated with the league environment. I mean, I think it's tough to criticize the league when you are a league partner, because I think at the end of the day, when the big wigs are in the room and they're renegotiating the deal, some of those things may come up that they were irked or frustrated, or they didn't like how the network covered a certain story. So that's a fine balance you have to create. But I think, like he said, it goes back to, can you explain this debate? Can you explain this topic if you sat down with that person face to face? And I think there are hard debates or hard discussions that must be had if it warrants it. And if you can back it up, cool. If not, then you may have to rethink what you're doing. So great stuff by Danny Corrales. It's all about who you know, right? Without TJ, we don't get Danny. And then hopefully maybe we can talk to Patrick down the road and what he's doing with YouTube, because I think, again, I literally have watched hundreds of, I'm sure, Will, you've done the same, right? Like, we've watched so many segments of The Jump, just kind of being NBA fans. But last time I've tuned in at noon on a weekday, it just hasn't happened. So that's great for brand awareness, but how does ESPN monetize that long term is really going to be the question that we always bring up on the show. All right, with that, that's my rant. We ask you every single show to check us out on iTunes and rate us 5 stars. Also, all the video podcasts are up on YouTube. We've had some great shows. TJ Adelshaw, we talked about, really breaking down Twitter. If you are interested in kind of the ESPN mothership that is, we have Katie Daly as well, that we interviewed a couple shows ago on just the inside of social media. So a lot of great shows. If you haven't checked them out, feel free to go in the archives and check those out as well. This time, no Dylan. So I'm going to thank Will Kelly and David Furker for all their help behind the scenes, helping it out. This has been episode number 35. Once again, thanks to Danny for coming on the show of the Business of Social podcast, powered by STN Digital.